The alien screams pierced the ears of Private Nathan Thompson as he squeezed off plasma bolts at the surrounding Saurian soldiers on the war-ravaged planet Craxis. Sweat dripped from his brow into his cybernetic eye implants. He dove for cover in a smoking crater. As an artillery shell burst overheat in the crater, a young Saurian female, only 16, Earth years old, cowered in the ashes and rubble. Her scales were dulled grey, caqued with soot. Private Thompson clicked the safety off his plasma rifle and aimed it at her head. She flinched. He paused. Her eyes were wide with primal terror. Thompson's hands tightened on the rifle grip. He couldn't pull the trigger. Suddenly, a squad of Saurian troopers emerged from a ruined outpost. They opened fire at Thompson's position. Plasma bolts sizzled the air. Thompson rolled, shielding the Saurian girl with his body. A plasma bolt seared into his shoulder. He gritted his teeth, aimed his rifle one-handed, and sprayed the Saurian squad with searing plasma. They crumpled into charred husks. Thompson coughed blood. The Saurian girl stared at him, shocked, grateful, afraid. Thompson knew his orders. Take no prisoners. But orders be damned. He couldn't murder this child in cold blood. Thompson hauled himself to his feet, keeping his rifle trained on potential threats. He had to reconnect with his human squad. If he brought back this Saurian prisoner, she could provide critical intel to help the humans win this brutal war for survival. The fate of humanity might hinge on this simple act of mercy. The Saurian girl didn't know it yet, but the human soldier who just saved her life had also saved the future of 2 warring species. Thompson reached a hand down to her. Humanity's last hope accepted it. Nathan and Tharos picked their way through the rubble-strewn streets, the sound of distant explosions echoing in their ears. The acrid smell of smoke and burnt flesh hung heavy in the air. As they rounded a corner, they stumbled upon a group of Saurian civilians huddled in the ruins of a collapsed building. Many were injured, their scales torn and blood oozing from deep gashes. Nathan hesitated, his orders to reconnect with his squad warring with his instinct to help those in need. Tharos looked at him, her eyes questioning. Nathan made his decision. He knelt beside the nearest Saurian, a young male with a deep cut on his leg. Nathan pulled out his medkit and began cleaning and bandaging the wound. Tharos watched in amazement as Nathan moved from one Saurian to the next, treating their injuries with gentle efficiency. "Why are you helping them?" she asked. "I thought humans were ruthless and uncaring. At least that's what the Confederation always told us." Nathan looked up at her, his hands still working. "Not all humans are the same, Tharos, just like not all Saurians are the enemy. We're all just people caught up in this damn war." They moved on, leaving the grateful Saurians behind. The sun beat down on them as they trudged through the desolate landscape. Suddenly, Nathan spotted something glinting in the rubble ahead. As they got closer, he realized it was the wreckage of a human convoy, the twisted metal still smoldering. Nathan searched through the debris, hoping to find survivors or supplies. Instead, he found a long-range communicator, miraculously still intact. He switched it on, static crackling from the speaker. "This is Private Nathan Thompson. Does anyone copy? I have critical intel about a Saurian prisoner requesting extraction over." Tharos's eyes widened in fear and anger. Before Nathan could react, she snatched the communicator from his hands and smashed it on the ground. "What the hell, Tharos?" Nathan yelled, rounding on her. "I won't be a pawn in your war," Tharos shouted back, her fists clenched. "I heard what you said. You were going to use me, trade me for information. If you really care about me, you'll help me get back to my people." Nathan ran a hand through his hair, frustration and uncertainty warring within him. He had his duty, but he also had this growing connection to Tharos, this need to protect her. "Fine," he said at last. "I'll help you, but we need to find somewhere safe to rest first, to plan our next move." As the sun began to set, they found shelter in an abandoned building, its walls pockmarked with blast holes. Nathan took first watch, letting Tharos curl up in a corner to sleep. He sat by the window, his rifle across his knees, watching the shadows lengthen across the ruined city. His mind raced with thoughts of the past few days, of the choices that had led him here. He had gone against orders, against everything he had been trained to do. And for what? To protect an enemy soldier? To follow some moral code that seemed increasingly irrelevant in this brutal war? Nathan looked over at Tharos, her face peaceful in sleep. No, he realized, he had done it because it was the right thing to do. Because even in the midst of all this horror and destruction, there was still a chance for compassion, for understanding. He just hoped that chance wouldn't get them both killed in the days to come. Nathan and Tharos crept through the rubble as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon. They picked their way carefully, watching for any signs of movement. Tharos spotted it first. There! An old Saurian outpost. It looks abandoned. Maybe we can find a way to contact my people. Nathan nodded. Worth a shot. Let's check it out. They approached the crumbling structure cautiously. Nathan scanned for any signs of life or active defenses. The place seemed dead. He motioned for Tharos to follow him. Just as they reached the entrance, a sharp click sounded beneath Nathan's boot. His blood ran cold. A mine. He reacted on instinct, shoving Tharos hard, sending her flying clear. Then the world erupted in fire and shrapnel. The force of the blast hurled Nathan backwards. He slammed into the rubble, his head cracking against concrete. Pain lanced through his leg, sharp and searing. He looked down to see blood pouring from a jagged wound in his thigh, his pants shredded. Shit. Nathan! Tharos scrambled to his side, her eyes wide with fear. You're hurt. He gritted his teeth, trying to stand, but his leg wouldn't hold him. I'm fine, we have to keep moving. Tharos shook her head. No way, you can barely walk. We need to get inside, find some medical supplies. She pulled his arm over her shoulders, taking his weight. Together they staggered into the outpost. Tharos lowered him gently to the floor. Wait here, she said. I'll see what I can find. Nathan leaned his head back against the wall, trying to steady his breathing. The pain was intense, pulsing with every heartbeat. He hoped Tharos found something useful. He didn't fancy his chances of making it very far like this. Tharos returned, her arms full of dusty medical gear. She knelt beside him and began cutting away the fabric around the wound. Her hands were surprisingly gentle as she cleaned away the blood and assessed the damage. You're lucky, she said. It missed the artery, but you've lost a lot of blood. I need to disinfect it and close the wound. She soaked a pad in antiseptic and pressed it to his thigh. Nathan hissed in pain, his fists clenching. Tharos worked quickly, her movements efficient and practiced. Nathan watched her, impressed despite the pain. You seem to know a lot about treating humans, he said. For a Saurian, I mean. Tharos glanced up at him, a small smile playing on her lips. I studied your anatomy for years. I always hoped I could be a doctor, maybe help foster understanding between our peoples. Stupid dream, I guess, in the middle of a war. Nathan was silent for a moment, considering her words. All this time he'd only seen the Saurians as the enemy, as a threat to humanity's survival. But maybe there was more to them than that. Maybe this whole damn war was just a misunderstanding, fueled by fear and prejudice on both sides. Tharos finished bandaging his leg and sat back. That should hold for now, but you need real medical attention, and soon. Nathan opened his mouth to reply, but a sound from outside cut him off. Voices, footsteps, the clink of human weaponry. His heart sank. The Federation had found them. The door burst open. Soldiers poured in, rifles raised, and leading them a face Nathan knew all too well. Sergeant Jackson, his squad leader. Private Thompson, Jackson barked. You want to explain why you're here with this Saurian instead of at your post? Nathan struggled to his feet, ignoring the pain. Sir, she's not a threat. She saved my life. We have to... I don't want to hear it, Private, Jackson snapped. That creature is a valuable asset. Hand her over now. That's an order. Nathan looked at Tharos. She met his gaze, her eyes filled with fear and resignation. He knew he should obey, but every instinct screamed at him to protect her, to stand his ground. No, sir, he said quietly. I won't let you take her. Jackson's face darkened with rage. He stepped forward, raising his rifle. Nathan braced himself, ready to fight, but Tharos moved first. She stepped in front of Nathan, her hands raised. "I surrender," she said, her voice steady. "Please don't hurt him." The soldiers swarmed forward, grabbing Tharos roughly. They dragged her away out of the outpost. Nathan tried to follow, but his leg gave out and he fell hard. "Tharos!" he shouted, but she was gone, swallowed up by the ranks of Federation soldiers. Nathan slumped against the wall, despair washing over him. He had failed her, failed in his duty. But as he sat there, a new resolve hardened in his heart. He would find a way to save Tharos, no matter the cost, and somehow, someway, he would find a way to end this war, once and for all. Nathan lay on a hospital bed in the Human Federation base, wincing as the medic stitched up his shrapnel wounds. His mind raced with thoughts of Tharos, of the sacrifice she had made for him. The guilt gnawed at his insides, sharper than any physical pain. The door hissed open, and Sergeant Jackson strode in, his face grim. "You've got some explaining to do, Private," he growled. "What the hell were you thinking, running off with that Saurian?" Nathan met his gaze, unflinching. "Her name is Tharos, sir, and she saved my life more than once." Jackson scoffed. "Saved your life? That lizard is a high-value target. She has intel we need to win this war, and now, thanks to you, we've got her locked up in a cell, waiting to be interrogated." Nathan's heart sank. He couldn't let that happen, couldn't let Tharos suffer for his mistakes. He had to make this right. After Jackson left, Nathan hobbled out of the medbay, his mind set. He found Mike in the barracks, cleaning his rifle. "I need your help," Nathan said, keeping his voice low. "We have to get Tharos out of that detention center." Mike looked at him like he'd grown a second head. "Are you crazy? You want to break out a Saurian prisoner?" "She's not just a prisoner, Mike. She's a person. And she doesn't deserve to be tortured for information." Mike was silent for a long moment, searching Nathan's face. Finally he sighed. "All right, man, I'm with you. What's the plan?" They spent the next few hours going over every detail, studying the layout of the detention center, the guard rotations, the security systems. They would make their move during the night shift when the skeleton crew was on duty. As darkness fell, they slipped out of the barracks and made their way to the detention center. Nathan's heart pounded in his chest as they crept through the halls, every shadow a potential threat. They reached the cell block without incident, but as Nathan approached Tharos's cell, alarms blared to life. Guards poured into the corridor, weapons drawn. "Halt! Identify yourselves!" one of them shouted. Nathan and Mike exchanged a glance. Then all hell broke loose. Plasma bolts filled the air as they dove for cover. Nathan returned fire, taking down 2 guards with well-placed shots. But there were too many of them, the odds stacked against the outnumbered humans. A cry of pain cut through the chaos. Nathan turned to see Mike slumped against the wall, a smoking hole in his chest. "Mike!" Nathan screamed, scrambling to his friend's side. Mike grabbed Nathan's arm, his eyes fierce despite the pain. "Get to the girl," he gasped out. "End this damn war. For all of us." With a final shuddering breath, Mike went still. Nathan blinked back, tears, grief, and rage welling up inside him. He couldn't let Mike's sacrifice be in vain. He fought his way to Tharos's cell, blasting the lock with a plasma bolt. Tharos stared at him in shock as he pulled her out. "Nathan, what are you doing here?" "Getting you out," Nathan replied grimly. "Come on, we don't have much time." They raced through the halls, dodging plasma fire and fallen bodies. Finally, they burst out into the cool night air, gasping for breath. Tharos turned to Nathan, her eyes wide. "I don't understand. Why did you come back for me?" Nathan took her hand, meeting her gaze. "Because it was the right thing to do. Because I care about you, and because I think you and I might be the only hope for stopping this war." He explained his plan, the idea that had taken root in his mind, to bring the leaders of their people together, to show them that they had more in common than they realized. That peace was possible if they were willing to fight for it. Tharos listened, her expression shifting from disbelief to a tentative hope. "Do you really think it could work?" she asked softly. "That we could end all this bloodshed and hatred?" I have to believe it, Nathan said. For Mike's sake. For all the lives lost on both sides, we have to try. Theros nodded slowly, resolve hardening in her eyes. Then I'm with you, she said. No matter what happens, we'll face it together. Side by side, the human soldier and the Saurian medic set off into the night, united by a shared dream of peace. The path ahead would be dangerous, the odds stacked against them. But for the first time in a long time, they had hope. And that was enough. Nathan and Theros stood side by side in the Stark conference room, the weight of their task heavy on their shoulders. The room buzzed with a tense energy as the leaders of the Human Federation and Saurian Confederation took their seats, eyeing each other warily across the table. Theros stepped forward, her heart pounding. She looked to Nathan, drawing strength from his presence. He nodded a silent reassurance. She took a deep breath and began to speak. I know there is a long history of bloodshed and mistrust between our peoples, Theros said, her voice steady despite her nerves. But I stand before you today as proof that we are not so different, that understanding and cooperation are possible if we are willing to try. She spoke of her time with Nathan, of the compassion and bravery he had shown her, of how he had risked everything to save her life, to fight for a chance at peace. This war has taken a toll on all of us, Theros continued, her gaze sweeping the room. How many more lives must be lost before we realize that violence is not the answer? It's time to put aside our differences and work towards a common goal, a future where our children can grow up without the shadow of war hanging over them. As she spoke, Theros saw the expressions on the leaders' faces begin to shift, the hard lines of anger and suspicion softening into something like contemplation, even hope. But before anyone could respond, the doors to the conference room burst open. A group of armed soldiers stormed in, led by a grizzled colonel with a wild look in his eyes. Traitors! He shouted, leveling his rifle at the Saurian delegation. You really think we can trust these scaly bastards? They killed my family. Chaos erupted as the soldiers opened fire. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, shattering the delicate truce. Nathan reacted on instinct, throwing himself in front of Theros. She screamed as the bolts tore into his flesh, his blood spattering hot across her face. They collapsed to the ground together, Nathan's body shielding hers. The Saurian guards leapt into action, subduing the attackers with ruthless efficiency. But it was too late. The damage had been done. Theros cradled Nathan's head in her lap, her tears mixing with his blood. His breathing was shallow, his eyes unfocused. Nathan, stay with me, Theros pleaded, her voice breaking. Please, you can't leave me. Nathan's hand found hers, his grip weak. Promise me, he whispered, each word an effort. Promise you'll find a way to end this war. Don't let my death be in vain. Theros nodded fiercely, even as sobs racked her body. I promise, she choked out. I'll never stop fighting for peace, for you. With a final, shuddering breath, Nathan went still. Theros howled in anguish, clutching his body to her chest. Around them, the leaders of both sides watched in stunned, horrified silence. In the days that followed, as shock gave way to grief, and then to grim determination, Theros threw herself into the peace negotiations with a fervor bordering on obsession. She would not let Nathan's sacrifice be for nothing. It was a long and arduous process, full of setbacks and compromises. But slowly, painfully, progress was made. A ceasefire was declared, then a tentative truce. Borders were redrawn, treaties signed. The weapons of war were laid down, replaced by the tools of diplomacy and rebuilding. Through it all, Theros was there, a tireless advocate for peace and understanding. She traveled between the Human Federation and Saurian Confederation, building bridges, healing old wounds. She became a symbol of hope, a living embodiment of the ideals Nathan had died for. Years passed, and the scars of war began to fade. Cities were rebuilt, families reunited. A new generation grew up, one that had never known the horrors of the battlefield. And on a quiet hillside, overlooking the capital city of the newly formed Galactic Alliance, a memorial was erected in Nathan's honor. A simple stone monument inscribed with his name and the words, "He gave his life so that others might live in peace. Tharos stood before the memorial, a single flower clutched in her hand. Tears streamed down her face as she remembered the brave human soldier who had shown her the true meaning of sacrifice, of love. She placed the flower at the base of the monument, a final tribute. "I miss you every day," Tharos whispered, "but I know that wherever you are, you're watching over us. Your legacy lives on, in the peace we've built, in the lives we've saved. Thank you, Nathan, for everything." As she turned to leave, Tharos felt a gentle breeze caress her face, almost like a loving touch, and for a moment she swore she could hear Nathan's voice on the wind, whispering the words that had become her mantra, her guiding light. "Find a way to end this war. Don't let my death be in vain." Tharos smiled through her tears, renewed determination filling her heart. She would keep fighting, keep building the future Nathan had dreamed of, a future of peace, of unity. A future worth dying for. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.